AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
Coming up on the Threat Status Podcast, we talk to Robert Lightfoot, president of Lockheed Martin Space and a former associate administrator at NASA, about the future of space exploration, the weaponization of space, and the Golden Dome missile shield. And then we break down the loss of trust in Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth among some generals and senior military officers, the collapse of an expected meeting between Presidents Trump and Putin, and the opening of a U.S. rare earth metals processing facility that doesn't rely on Chinese materials. Don't forget to go to WashingtonTimes.com and sign up for the daily Threat Status newsletter. Hello and welcome to the Threat Status Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Wolfgang, national security correspondent at the Washington Times. I'm joined as always by my esteemed co-host Guy Taylor, the national security editor here at the Times. Jam-packed show, even more than usual this week, with a fantastic interview coming up with Robert Lightfoot, the president of Lockheed Martin Space and a former associate administrator at NASA. So stay tuned for that to hear about the future of space travel, concerns about the weaponization of space, the Golden Dome, missile shield, and much more. And of course, later on, we'll talk about my piece in the Washington Times this week about Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth losing the trust of at least some generals and senior officers across the Pentagon. But before we get to that, Guy, first things first, as always, what's on your radar right now?
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here with you for another week. I'm tracking a range of things, the first of which being that the much anticipated Ukraine peace negotiation summit between President Trump and Vladimir Putin that Mr. Trump had said would happen in Hungary has been canceled. President Trump said on October 27 that he's going to pull out of the summit due to stalled negotiations. There's a lot of hand-wringing over this, Ben, and really just the extent to which the president is being played by Vladimir Putin, really that Putin just wants to keep the war going in Ukraine, buy time. My take is that President Trump likely pulled out because of his own concern that Putin is playing games with him or leading him on to the idea that there could be this grand leader-level Ukraine peace negotiation. The reality, Ben, is that Trump's push to end the Ukraine war remains highly fluid and potentially volatile. The big question right now is whether Trump is going to authorize the transfer of powerful Tomahawk missiles to the Ukrainian military. That's something that could dramatically increase Ukraine's capability to carry out strikes deep inside Russia. We don't know if that's going to happen. I think it's a very hot topic among the president's closest national security advisors right now. We also don't know if that does happen, how would Putin respond? Would it pressure him to the negotiating table? It's very interesting that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is now going around to NATO allies in Europe also asking for longer range missiles as Ukraine heads into this winter period where Russian forces are engaged in increased attacks on Ukrainian electricity infrastructure, trying to deprive Ukrainians of heat and electricity as the winter months come on. We're going to continue tracking all of that in the Threat Status Daily newsletter, Ben. As of now, the Trump-Putin summit is off. By the way, our own correspondent Von Cocaine explored some of this in an exclusive interview with Hungary's foreign minister that we published on October 22nd. The summit between Putin and Trump was supposed to happen in Hungary. That aside, Ben, there's Also, a lack of clarity right now from the Trump administration on whether or not the president is going to have a summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping at the major leaders gathering of APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Group, that's slated for October 31 and November 1 in Seoul, South Korea. Mr. Trump made headlines in recent days by saying talks with China could result in some type of deal over Taiwan. Remember, the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing claims to control the U.S. aligned island democracy of Taiwan, a world leader in microchip manufacturing. And Xi Jinping personally has vowed that mainland China will somehow take control of Taiwan using force if necessary. Here's the catch, Ben. We don't know if this Trump-Xi meeting is actually going to happen in Seoul. I think it's going to be a last-minute scenario, and we're going to be tracking it this coming week in the Threat Status newsletter. Moving on, a couple of advanced technology national security developments, some of which got press and some of which are just sort of under the radar. One was the revelation by the California-based defense tech firm Shield AI of the company's new uncrewed X-Bat drone. This is a big deal, Ben, because this thing is basically an unmanned fighter jet that has a 2,000-mile range. Remember that Shield AI is the company that brought the world the VBAT drone that flies with artificial intelligence like a self-driving car. We're tracking whether the X-Bat, which costs a heck of a lot more than the VBAT, we're up over 20 million for an X-Bat. Is this going to have a similar impact that the VBAT had? Shield AI says it developed the X-Bat specifically for the U.S. Air Force to work alongside human pilots. The X-Bat is designed to carry air-to-air missiles, bombs, even electronic warfare platforms. It's designed basically to be adaptable to the current U.S. Air Force collaborative combat aircraft program, the CCA. One other tech development, Ben, you'll remember a few weeks back on the podcast here, our feature interview was with Nick Myers, the CEO of a rare earths mining company called Phoenix Tailings. That interview was all about the dangers of China's dominance over the rare earths market globally. Interestingly, this week, Phoenix Tailings, it's a Massachusetts-based company, announced that it has officially opened a rare earths metals processing facility in New Hampshire that does not rely on any Chinese materials. This new facility will produce, 200 tons of light and heavy rare earths metals annually. Rare earths, Ben, are critical to the manufacture of everything from AI microchips to smartphones and fighter jets. If listeners want to look inside the great power U.S.-China competition over rare earths, I encourage them to go watch my exclusive video interview that is on the threat status pages with Senator Todd Young. He's the Indiana Republican who wrote the CHIPS Act a few years ago. Anyhow, he's pushing rare earths legislation right now aimed at putting the U.S. in the driver's seat of the global rare earths market. This is one of those national security issues that's everywhere all the time, but gets almost no coverage in the mainstream media.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's a good reason why you talked to Senator Young about this, why we had Nick Myers on the podcast a few weeks ago, because this is a hugely important issue that gets underreported all the time. So we're going to try to do our part, of course, to change that. My week has been mostly consumed first with writing a deep dive on Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and then talking about it and doing some media appearances to break it all down in the days since. I've been flattered by some of the compliments I've gotten from other journalists, but as you might expect, there's been a fair amount of criticism and accusations of anti-Hegseth bias or that I'm some kind of secret leftist, even though I work at the Washington Times for almost 15 years. All that's fine, of course. If you haven't read the story, the big takeaways I think you need to know are that one Army general I talked to said that Hegseth's big Quantico speech a few weeks ago was, quote, a massive waste of time, and that, quote, if he ever had us, he lost us, unquote. Other senior officers I talked to said that Hegseth is seen in some circles as self-absorbed, someone whose grandstanding is below the institution of the U.S. military, and that his management style is chaotic and erratic. And he's too obsessed with things like grooming standards and press access to the Pentagon, not focused enough on the threat from China, the rapidly changing face of modern warfare that we talk about almost every week here in the show, and other sort of big picture issues. I'd encourage you to go read that piece on the Washington Times website. It's chock full of information, a lot of it pretty damning about what is the narrative around Hegseth. And it's worth remembering, of course, Guy, this didn't happen overnight. Just a few weeks into the job, Secretary Hegseth went to a NATO conference and got way out in front of the administration in saying that Ukraine would never be able to get all of its territory back from Russia. Even some Republican senators blasted him publicly for that. He was a key part of the infamous Signal chat in which Atlantic journalist Jeffrey Goldberg was accidentally added. You can add to that the massive turnover inside the Pentagon. Firings, resignations, early retirements that we talk about almost weekly, it seems, here in the show, of key generals across the ranks. And it was starting to feel to me there was almost a powder keg of frustration and disenchantment, if you will, with Hegseth, and it seemed to blow over at Quantico. Now, there are two things I do want to make sure that I highlight here in the interest of fairness. One, and this is really important, recruiting is way up under Secretary Hegseth. We've talked about recruiting numbers on this show, including the Army smashing its recruiting goal, I think all the way back in July or August for the entire year. The Navy's done so as well, months ahead of schedule. So all across the services, numbers are way up. And supporters say that's because of Hegseth's return, the warrior ethos of the military, the administration's push against DEI programs and woke policies. It's hard to quantify the reasons, but the results aren't disputable. And in fairness, I think Hegseth deserves some credit for it. The second thing I want to mention, just to kind of lift the curtain a little bit on this, is how difficult it is to actually do this kind of reporting amid the Pentagon's new press policy, which forced reporters to acknowledge that we could be considered a security threat for doing our jobs and asking sources for information not approved by the government. Quick aside, the Pentagon this week said that more than 60 journalists have signed a document and that there's a new generation of the press corps in place. We'll talk more about that, of course, down the road. We didn't sign that document here at the Washington Times, and neither did Fox News, where Secretary Hegseth used to work. But it was difficult to go into the building, even when we did have a desk at the Pentagon, because I wouldn't want to be seen talking to sources about this in person. And when the Office of the Secretary of Defense is reportedly planning to give people lie detector tests, you don't want to put those sources in that position. So it's worth keeping in mind here that this policy makes it harder, tangibly harder, for reporters to do real journalism. But the last thing to mention is that's what Secretary Hegseth wants, it seems. There's a new Pentagon memo just recently, or the past couple of days, restricting how military officials can communicate with Congress. They've banned officials from speaking at think tank events without explicit permission from Hegseth's office. So they're trying to put out nothing but sanitized, government-approved information that the secretary and his inner circle personally like and approve of. I think that's indisputable at this point. That's just kind of where we are at this point, Guy.
Ben, as national security editor, obviously I followed your reporting very closely on this, and I've been involved in some of the source conversations. Your story, I thought, was very sober and clear, and frankly, it was balanced. We went back and forth about that with regard to the Pentagon spokesman, Sean Parnell, giving you an exclusive statement and how to play that in the story and to point out the recruiting successes. I stand by our reporting 100% on this.
And we are joined now by Robert Lightfoot, the president of Lockheed Martin Space and an officer of Lockheed Martin Corporation. Robert leads Lockheed Martin Space business, which is an $11 billion enterprise employing more than 22,000 people all over the world. Robert spent 29 years at NASA, including as the associate administrator, among other roles. Robert, it's an honor. Thank you so much for coming on the Threat Status Podcast.
Great to be here, guys. Just excited about doing this.
Well, let's start here from your unique perch as the former acting administrator of NASA and now president of Lockheed Martin Space. As sort of the big broad question to start us out here. What do you see, or how would you define the importance of space in 2025, just in terms of how dependent humanity has become on space today. And then relatedly on that point, how important is it from a global security and U.S. national security perspective right now as we're talking today?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest way to think about space is it's become the great connector. I think if you look at what we can do from orbit and the things you can do from space that you don't have the ability to do here on the ground, right? Terrestrially, as we say, that's probably the big piece of it. And I think it's happened in such a way that people don't even know it, right? They don't even know they're dependent on space in some places. I do a lot of talks with folks that aren't in our business, and it's just interesting how I won't say naive. I'm not going to, I think they're just naive about what space is doing for them on a daily basis. I mean, I've literally had people say, why do I need GPS satellites? I have maps on my phone, right? They don't recognize that signal's coming from where it's coming from. So I think and because of that dependency, right, that we've gotten to, it does become a national security, a global security challenge. The phrase we use here at Lockheed Space is protect, connect, and explore, right? And I think that's what space does. We protect our warfighters, we protect the public when we build our weather satellites that we build. And that's our goal, right, is to make sure we're protecting. Then we do this connection where communications, space can make communications ubiquitous, right? It's not this cell tower to cell tower. We can actually connect. And you're seeing that with so many private constellations in the communications world that are coming up there. But then there's obviously the national security side as well. And then explore, right? That's the stuff that gets everybody's attention when we land on Mars and we visit a planet that's out the outer solar system. These are the things that Lockheed does, or Lockheed Space does with our government partners, and that's the exciting part that gets people fired up. We're about to fly Orion here in the first part of 2026, going to take humans back to the moon and bring them home safely. So that's the imperative is that from a security perspective for me is we're in space. We are using space. It is now, because of our dependency, we have to now protect it. It's now a warfighting domain, right? That's the way we talk about it. So I think that's kind of the imperative is that really, if I had to summarize it, it'd be we're dependent on it. So we better make sure it's available to us as a nation.
Let's talk about where we're going. I mean, you mentioned, everyone's, of course, uses GPS and maps, on their phones on a daily basis, including, I think, probably all of us in this conversation right now. You were at NASA for 29 years. We weren't doing that 29 years ago. We didn't have smartphones with Google Maps and what have you. So you've been in this industry and working in this space, pardon the pun, through a lot of periods of significant change over the decades. What does the future look like? What are some of the trends that you're seeing now that you think are going to shape sort of the future of space as we go forward?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first started in the business, we'd build a single one or two large spacecraft and we'd get them on orbit and they would do a very specific job. And they were frankly expensive. We didn't have launch available like we do now. And those were kind of the challenges, right? So because you didn't have launch, and this is my kind of take on it, I used to call them Christmas trees. If you were lucky enough to get a launch, man, you better hang every ornament on that tree you can. And so you make these big bespoke systems. Hopefully the launch went well and you were up there, right? So the game changers that I see today and the trends, and it's been going on for a while. This isn't new, but look at the new launch entrants, right? SpaceX has changed that model. ULA's got the new Vulcan. You're seeing Blue come into play. You got Firefly. You got Rocket Labs. All these folks have come in where access to space is, while still hard, right? Still a congested manifest to get these things into orbit. It's still a lot better and a lot less expensive than it was. So once you take down the barrier of cost to get to space, all of a sudden that opens up a whole nother discussion. And the discussion becomes, what can I get up there faster? So what you're seeing trend wise is you're seeing no more of these single vehicles. You're seeing a proliferated architectures come into play where people are building these massive constellations, whether it's for defense, like Space Defense Agency, or Space Development Agency, sorry, or whether it's Kuiper or Starlink. Those kind of activities they're being enabled A, by launch, but B, by the technology. So I see that continuing. I actually see more is more resilient in a lot of ways. If you think about resiliency, if you're dependent on one or two spacecraft, you're not very resilient to any kind of threat. But you can actually change that dynamic if you've got thousands of things and they can talk to each other and transfer it. That's what that trend I see is. We're going to go with more proliferated constellations, and I think that's allows a tech refresh at a faster rate as well, right? So that's just the kind of things that I think we're going to see.
Robert, one more quickly here before I bring Guy into the conversation. And you alluded to this, I think, a minute ago in your first answer, but I want to ask about what you see as far as the future of the civilian side of space exploration, whether it's humans going back to the moon or eventually to Mars, the kind of things, of course, that capture, the imagination of the American people and have for decades. What is on kind of the near term horizon and things that you think we can expect to see with regard to NASA or private sector partners in terms of civilian space exploration?
Well, there's a lot going on. When it all happens is probably the bigger challenge has always been. Usually takes longer than we think to do these things as we go forward. But you're going to see Artemis 2. That's probably the most near-term thing that's coming. And hopefully in the first part of 2026, we'll take a crew of 4 around the moon and bring them back safely. That'll be the next step in the journey to get people to land on the moon. And I think you'll see that landing happen, hopefully before 2028 will be the next landing when we land on the moon, and that's called Artemis 3. After that, I think you're going to just see a continual push that way. But let's don't forget low Earth orbit, right? That you see there's a whole bunch of folks working on what we call commercial lunar destinations. There's these commercial space stations, for lack of a better word. They won't be as complex and as large as the space station we have on orbit now. But are there opportunities for people to do that from a commercial perspective? And I think really the barrier for exploration is how much of it is going to be because of the government, because is there a business case, right? Is there ultimately a business case to go do it versus a commercial case? And I think low Earth orbit has become accessible now where you could have something in low Earth orbit. Out from that is probably still going to be government for quite a long time. It's going to be a government initiative, a national imperative, something that that does strike the imagination and inspires the next generations to stay in this field. And rewrite textbooks. That's what I used to say when I was at NASA. We want to go do the missions that rewrite the textbooks. And that's when people get excited about what we're doing. And that's when I get excited, as you can probably tell, about those opportunities. And we just got to make sure we're allowing as a nation our ability to go do those things.
Robert, it's Guy Taylor. You mentioned the idea a few minutes ago of space as a warfighting domain. I have a question for you. I think I know the answer because I've been out and about following your public remarks over the past couple of years. And my question is, do you see space as becoming weaponized within great power competition? China, the US, Russia, and I'm assuming that you do see it in some way as being weaponized. And I want to know who is responsible for that. Is it China? Is it Russia? Is it the United States?
Yeah, my take on that, Guy, is that the threat is real. There is a threat. We have had some of our adversaries, you mentioned them, China, Russia, have done things in space that give us pause and make us wonder, how do I now protect my assets I have in space that allow me to do all the things I just talked about? So I believe the threat is probably where you have to start, and you got to determine, yes, that threat is real. And now we have to go say, okay, what, are we going to be defensive, offensive, or are we just going to put capability on orbit? What's going to be our capability? You can debate whether it's defensive or offensive. Is a fighter jet defensive or offensive? And the answer is yes, right? And so how do we think about that from an on orbit perspective? So you see initiatives like Golden Dome that are going to have a space component to them for sure. And I think that's the place where the U.S. has begun to talk about where we're going to have weapons or offensive capability in space and not just be defensive for the assets that we have. So yeah, I think it's coming, and I think it all goes back to the threat. And just like any system that we build today, because we build a lot of systems here on Earth, the goal is deterrence here. The goal is you never want to use them. That's not the goal. The goal is to just make sure we will if we've got them.
I think that Ben is going to ask you about Golden Dome in a second, but I want to drill a little further into another thing that you brought up in the beginning here, and that it's that intersection between private assets, government assets in space, and security. How should we view the distinction or maybe the increasing lack of a distinction between private and government assets in space. If the U.S. or our allies rely on private satellites for communications, internet access, location data, and other things, does the government need to provide new security or financial guarantees to the companies that build this stuff? Is there a line between private and public space assets that's just going to be very blurry in the coming decades?
The way I look at it, Guy, is we've got so much technology being developed across this country. That's what I love about this country. We can develop technology like no one else, and it's the innovative spirit that you see in a lot of the new entrants, and the innovative spirit you'd see at Lockheed Martin. If you came to visit us, we could show you what we're doing. We don't get a lot of credit for that or a lot of press, but we're probably one of the most impressive innovation entities I know, right? And that's one reason I'm here. The key is, how do you connect those dots? The technology that's being developed, maybe for a totally different reason here on Earth, that we can bring to the game from a space perspective. And I think I like to say it's an and, not an or. And it really is. It's us plus the entities this country has and has developed over time. How can you put those two together? I think from my perspective, if I just think about Lockheed Martin, we're doing things today we didn't do 5 years ago that make us much more like a new entrant. Are we like a new entrant? Absolutely. Exactly? No, of course not. Right? We're not playing that game exactly like they do, but we got a lot of traits like that. But guess what we have? We have legacy, mission, knowledge, and scale. And that is the key. If you put the legacy, mission, knowledge, and scale that we have with our own technology development and the technology development being done by so many people, we can bring a solution for this country that I think is going to solve just about anything they need, whether it's an exploration initiative, whether it's a warfighting initiative, or whether it's even things like Golden Dome. So I think that's it. To me, it's just this concept of and versus or, and that's what this nation is going to need to get after these threats that we have.
Well, it's you since you brought it up, Robert, let's talk about the Golden Dome. We, of course, have talked a lot about it here on this podcast and in the other threat status platforms over the past few months, almost coming up on a year now. I'm curious, when we're talking about Golden Dome, a next generation futuristic missile defense shield for the United States, do you see the Golden Dome as a definitionally being a space-based system or a space-based plan to institute the Golden Dome? Or do you think it'll be mostly ground-based or some combination of the two? There's a debate, as you well know, going on about to what degree THAADs and Patriots and other systems like that should be a part of the Golden Dome. What do you see as that balance, and why is space an important component of it for the Golden Dome?
Yeah, I don't really see it as one or the other. I definitely see it as an and, right? And I think it's going to take space and terrestrial assets to do what we need to do. Obviously, I think Lockheed's very well positioned to be part of that, but we're going to need a lot of partners. The nation's going to have a lot of partnerships come together to pull off this pretty spectacular opportunity here to get these things done. I think the space-based piece, the way I think about it, is that's your first line of defense, right? If you've got things in space, you stop things before they get here. That's kind of the goal. And then you have, in case that doesn't work, you've got a second set of activities that are here terrestrially, whether it's THAAD, Patriots, as you said, right? The radars that we develop that sit here and allow us to see when those threats are coming. I think in the way I think about it, Ben, is that there's going to be the key here is going to be the interconnectivity of those things, and that's what we call command and control, C2. You've heard that phrase a million times, I know. You talk about something that's going to take the power of all these companies that we have in this country. You're now going to connect things that weren't meant to be connected. And you got to have, that's going to be foundational to this whole process, to give the decision makers, the warfighters, give them the kind of the decision support tools that they need to make a call. What are we going to do? Some of that will become autonomous. I'm convinced of that. Eventually it'll be automated. But in the near term, I think it's going to be more taking all this data that's going to come into a decision maker and somehow using AI, ML to provide them the kind of environmental awareness they're going to need to make a decision, a pretty important decision if they have to in that situation. So I think it's definitely an and. I think a lot of the kit exists today. I think that's how come we can think we can get there by 2028. is there's a lot of kit, but the kit was built for a different reason. So how do we now stitch it together from all different suppliers that were built for all different reasons? How do we stitch it together to protect our national security here in the U.S. is kind of the way I think about it. So I think it's a mix, space and ground.
Well, that leads right into the next question on Golden Dome, Robert, and that's sort of about the price tag of the whole thing. Because as you rightly point out, we're talking about a lot of different assets here that need to be meshed together and controlled, and AI and ML incorporated into them. And there's never been a missile shield built like this before. So we're certainly breaking new ground with it. So far, only $25 billion has actually been allocated by the United States government.
I think approved, Ben. I don't even know if a dime has been
approved,
allocated.
and right. It's exactly right. And there are questions, of course. The price tags estimates are much, much higher than that. How much do you think would be needed over even just say the coming 5 years if Golden Dome is going to be a truly kind of futuristic and space-based missile defense system incorporating all of that stuff that you just laid out? Is there a danger this price tag kind of gets out of hand here? How do you see that going forward?
Well, I think the way we manage that is we manage it with the requirements that are going to be put out, right? And to me, this is how the architecture gets defined, how the architecture gets laid out is going to really drive that discussion. And you can do an architecture again if you think about a development cycle. A typical development cycle for a weapon system, a space system, whatever it is, you have a lot of upfront cost that come with that. And that's why I think it's so important that we're going to use existing kit. That's behind us. The non-recurring engineering for THAAD is done, right? We are using that system today. Patriot, same way. You got radars like the long range radar we built at Lockheed Martin. You even got C2 that's already done, right? So to me, that's going to be critical that we keep the development part to a minimum. Space-based interceptors will be the one place where that's a development program. But even that can be done in a way where you utilize existing capabilities, right? So that you limit the amount of non-recurring engineering. To do that, right, that's why you got to be maniacal about holding to your requirements. Don't let things creep in. Don't let that requirements creep get there. And I think at the end of the day, you've got to have a conversation in that architecture. Remember, it's an architecture, not just a single system. And so maybe you don't have 100% probability that that's going to work. I'll just think about as you're working through different things we have to protect, right? Across the time from the time a threat is detected to the time it would hit the U.S. Right? If I need one system that's going to stop that, okay, that could be really expensive and really hard to do. But if I have one system that's maybe very reliable, still a good system, but it doesn't get everything, I've got another system behind it. I got another system behind it, right? You got a kind of a layered approach to how you're going to deal with that threat. Now, historically, what we've done is we've done single weapon systems to protect against all of it, right? Now, if you look at the layered approach, you actually have a really good shot at doing this. And I think doing it in a way that is not fiscally irresponsible. I really believe that. I wouldn't be trying to help get this done if I didn't think we could do it for a cost point that doesn't, break the taxpayers' back, right? And I think that's where we are. And I actually believe we can do that.
Good stuff. Thank you so much. Robert Lightfoot, the president of Lockheed Martin Space. It's a pleasure. Thanks for coming on the Threat Status Podcast.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it, and appreciate what y'all are doing to get those messages out there. So look forward to talking to you soon.
And it's time now for Threat of the Week, our weekly segment here in the show where Guy and I each identify a threat, whether it's here at home, domestically, or in some corner of the world that we think is impacting U.S. national security right now this week. And my threat of the week is government employee furloughs, particularly folks who deal with nuclear weapons. Colleague Mike Glenn had a story in the Washington Times this week about how 1,400 workers with the National Nuclear Security Administration are set to be furloughed amid the government shutdown. These are the people who literally safeguard America's nuclear arsenal. They monitor it and ensure the areas where nuclear items are stored are safe and there's not some kind of accident or accidental release of nuclear material in one form or another. Some of them also do work in cybersecurity in the event that, for example, an adversary could try to use a cyber attack to compromise a site where nuclear weapons are stored. These individuals also do work on developing new nuclear weapons. So we just talked last week in the show about how the Army wants to use nuclear energy in the form of small mobile reactors for power generation at bases around the world. That's obviously a very different thing than nuclear weapons, but Energy Secretary Chris Wright was in Nevada this week talking about the dangers of the furlough, and he was at the Association of the U.S. Army Conference in Washington last week talking about the small mobile nuclear reactors. So nuclear energy and nuclear weapons very much at the forefront right now. And this is the first time workers at that agency have had to be furloughed since it was formed all the way back in 2000. Some of them will stay on, even if they miss paychecks, because they're considered, of course, too essential to be taken off the job. But look, I think most of us are sick of the politics around the government shutdown, but it's my thread of the week right now because we're starting to see some real tangible impacts directly on U.S. national security.
Interesting, Ben. My thread of the week is that of mission creep surrounding the current U.S. military campaign targeting alleged drug cartel boats off the Venezuelan coastline. We reported on October 19, actually you reported, Ben, that the U.S. Embassy in Trinidad and Tobago, the twin island nation that's about 7 miles off the coast of Venezuela, had issued a, quote, heightened state of alert, end quote. That alert came roughly a week after President Trump publicly revealed that he has authorized the CIA to conduct covert operations inside Venezuela. He also said he's weighing possible ground missions inside the country. Such missions may be warranted. Okay, but the reality is that they could target drug cartels operating in Venezuela, but they could also extend to trying to topple the government of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro in what could become a U.S.-led regime change operation. While Venezuela is widely seen to be a partner of U.S. adversaries, particularly Iran and Russia, I'm flagging the prospect of mission creep here as my thread of the week, Ben, because the situation could become explosive and open a war in the Western Hemisphere that triggers a major humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, we've talked on this show a lot, and we'll continue to do so in the future about, President Trump, who's, end forever wars and limit the use of the, U.S. military abroad, now ordering, the military strikes in Iran and potentially, it seems at least speculation that could happen in Venezuela as well. And so that's worth keeping an eye on that sort of shift geopolitically and politically for President Trump. So thank you for that. A huge thanks to Robert Lightfoot from Lockheed Martin for that great interview. And a big thanks to all of you, of course, our listeners. Please go ahead, hit that subscribe button, share with all of your friends, and Guy and I will be back next week on the Threat Status Podcast.